Hey guys, welcome to lesson 122, day 3. We are going to be doing an equation review today, just to kind of go over those equation solving skills that you learned back in Algebra 1. So we're going to be going over the various types of equations that you should know about, and we'll talk about some of the different properties that we run into when we solve those equations. All right. So we're going to review what it means to solve an equation. We're going to learn about the different types of equations we need to be ready for, and then the property we're going to run into is the zero product property that we need. All right. Okay, so let's look at our first equation here, number 1. We've got a lot of things going on here. We've got parentheses and we've got a lot of moving parts going on here. So remember, what it means to solve an equation is we are looking for a value of x such that if I were to plug that value in for x in its different locations, it would make the equation true. In other words, I would end up with the same number on both sides of the equal sign. Okay. Now the way that we find that value of x is we move things around, we combine like terms, we distribute if we need to, until x is all by itself on one side of the equation. And the other thing that you need to remember is that when we move things from side to side in an equation, what I mean by side to side is from one side of the equal sign to the other. Whatever we do on one side, we have to do on the other side to keep the equation balanced. All right. So watch me work through this one, and if you have any questions, make sure you hop over to the Zoom chat and I can clarify anything that's in the video. All right. So here we go. So over here we've got a parentheses. I want to get rid of these parentheses, and I'm going to use the distributive property to do that. So I'm going to take this -4 and I'm going to distribute it to each term inside of the parentheses. And what that means is I'm going to multiply each thing by -4. So when I do -4 times x, I get -4x. And when I do -4 times 6, I get -24. Okay, so now the parentheses are gone, and this is a little bit easier to work with. Now I'm going to go over here and I'm going to do the same thing. I have a +4 outside of these parentheses, so I want to get rid of those parentheses too. So I'm going to distribute that 4, not the -6. The -6, I'm not doing anything with that right now, so I'm just going to move that down. And then I'm going to take care of these multiplications. So 4 times 5x is 20x. And then 4 times 3 is 12. Okay, so now this is what my equation looks like after I apply the distributive property. Okay. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and I'm going to look for any like terms that I can combine on each side of the equation. So on this side, I have a -4x and a -24. I can't combine those because this one has an x and this one doesn't. So there's nothing to do on this side of the equation for right now. So I'm going to just bring that down unchanged. Now over here I have a -6x and a +20x. I can combine those two because they both have an x. So -6x plus 20x combines to give me a +14x. And then I still have this plus 12 on the end. Okay. So now this is where we're at. It's going from a big mess to something that's looking a little bit neater, a little bit more compact. All right. So now at this point I am going to start moving things from side to side. So I want to get all my x's on one side of the equation and everything else on the other side of the equation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this 4x, this -4x, to the right hand side with the 14x. And the way I'm going to do that is by doing the opposite of what I see here. So this is a -4x. So I'm going to add 4x to both sides. Just like that, right? Whatever I do on one side, I have to do on the other. So now these cancel. All that's left is a -24. And over here, I have 18x now because 14 plus 4 is 18. And then I have plus 12. Okay. Now I'm going to take this 12 and I'm going to move it over here with the -24. So I'm going to subtract 12 from both sides. And over here I'll get a -36. Extend my line here. And the 12's cancel over here, leaving me with just an 18x. Okay. Last step here to get x by itself, I need to move this 18. So since this is multiplication, I'm going to do the opposite and divide by 18 on both sides. All right, so the 18's cancel, so now all I have left is x. And then -36 divided by 18 is negative 2. And there it is. X is by itself, and that reveals that number. So if I took this negative 2 and I were to plug it in for the different x's that I see in the equation, I would get a true statement. I would end up with the same number on both sides. Okay. All right, let's try number 2 here. This is a different looking equation. There's some fractions going on here, so I'll show you how to handle those. The first thing you want to do is you want to take these expressions like the x plus 2 and the 5x minus 4 and throw those in a set of parentheses. Okay, and when we have two proportions or two fractions like this on opposite sides of an equal sign, you can use something called cross multiplication to help you solve this very quickly. Okay, so we're going to cross multiply, and what that means is I'm going to take this 4 and I'm going to multiply it by the 5x minus 4. So I'm going to get 4 parentheses 5x minus 4 equals. And then on the other side of the equal sign, I'm going to do the other cross multiplication, which is the negative 8 times x plus 2. Just like that. All right, so now I have this new equation, and like I said, I got this by doing the cross multiplication property, and now I'm going to start solving this just like I did in number 1. I'm going to use the distributive property to clear out these parentheses and see what I get, right? So 4 times 5x is 20x, 4 times negative 4 is negative 16. Negative 8 times x is negative 8x, and negative 8 times 2 is negative 16. Okay, so this is where I'm at. I'm going to move my x's to the left-hand side. So to do that, I'm going to add 8x to both sides, so that way they cancel over here. So I'll get 28x minus 16 equals, and then all that's left over here is a negative 16. Right, and then I'm going to move this negative 16 over here, so I'm going to add 16 to both sides. So they cancel. So I get 28x equals 0. Extend my line a little bit here. And then to finish this off, I'm going to divide by 28. Right, and what we end up with is x equals 0. And that'll be my answer. Right. Let's see what time we're at here. Okay, so let's do another one real quick. All right, so number 3, this one also looks different from the first two. You'll notice that we have two parentheses, right? So we have an x plus 4 in the first parentheses and an x plus 1 in the second one. And this is where this thing called the zero product property is going to come into play. All right, so we have two things that are being multiplied to give us a 0. Now let's think about that for just a second, right? So let's say I have two numbers and I'm going to multiply them and I have to get a 0. All right. So for instance, if I were to try 3 and 1, that would not work because 3 times 1 is 3. All right. So how do I ensure that I always end up with a 0 on the right hand side here? Well, I could put a 0 here, right? So I could do 3 times 0 and I would get 0. I could switch those around, so I could put the 0 first, right? So I could put the 0 first and put the 3 over here and I would still get 0. So what we need to make sure, right, for this to be true, one of these numbers always has to be a 0. Okay? It's very similar to what we're doing here. We have two things. We have an x plus 4 and we have an x plus 1. One of these things needs to be a 0. So if I pretend that the x plus 4 is going to be 0, I can say, well, x plus 4 must equal 0, and then solve that equation. So I could subtract 4 on both sides. The 4's would cancel, and we find that x equals negative 4. And that gives us one of our solutions, because if I take this negative 4 and I plug it in here, I'll get negative 4 plus 4, which makes this thing a 0, and then 0 times whatever this is, it doesn't matter, is going to be 0. Right? Now the other possibility is that x plus 1 could be a 0. Right? Either one of them could end up being a 0. So I'm going to say x plus 1 equals 0 and solve that one. So I'm going to say minus 1, minus 1. These cancel, and we find that x equals negative 1 is another solution. So there's our two solutions for this equation. This one happens to have 2. Either one of these, if I took either one of these numbers and I plugged them in, I would get that 0 out. Okay, and that's the zero product property. All right, last one I'm going to show you today is the quadratic formula. Right, so we learned about this quadratic formula last week, and so like when do we use this quadratic formula? Well, this is the kind of equation where the quadratic formula comes in handy because we have a quadratic, and I can see that because of the power of 2. Okay, so I'm going to start this off by identifying my A, my B, and my C. Okay, so A is going to be 3, that's the number in front of x squared. B is the -8, so I'll put a -8 in here. And C is going to be the -80. Okay, and then I set up my quadratic formula. So remember, the quadratic formula is -b, and I'll write this down over here. So -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And you guys should already have that in a previous set of notes. So now I'm going to plug in my a, b, and c values and see what I get. So I've got -8. Why do I have 2 negatives? Well, there's one built into the formula, and there's one attached to my b value. So I got 2 of them. Plus or minus, square root. All right, so we got b squared. Now this is another common mistake for students. Make sure you put that b value in a set of parentheses before you square it, because if you try and put this in a calculator without the parentheses, the calculator is going to give you the wrong answer. Okay, so then we got 4 times a times c, so 4 times 3 times -80. And this will be all over 2a. So we got 2 times 3. So there's my setup. All right, and I'm just going to go through and tackle one piece at a time. All right, -8 becomes +8, plus or minus. -8 squared is a +64. And then I need to do this multiplication. That's a big one, so I might grab my calculator for that one. So let me clear out my calculator here. And we've got 4 times 3 times 80. Don't worry about the negatives yet. I'll show you what to do with that. So when I multiply that, I get a 960. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and write down my 960 here. Now the question is, do I put a plus or a minus here, right? Well, I'm going to put a plus because I have 2 negatives, right? I have a negative here and a negative here. Let me close off that parenthesis. So 2 negatives, when we multiply, will make a positive here. So I'm going to say plus. And this will all be over 6. Okay. All right, continuing on. 8 plus or minus square root. I want to do 64 plus 960. All right, so I'm going to do 64 plus 960. I get 1024 in my square root, all over 6. All right, so I'll keep going here. So we've got 8 plus or minus. Now I need to do the square root of 1024. All right, so I'm going to go second, square root 1024. I hope it's a nice number. It is. It's 32. That's awesome. So 32 over 6. All right, and this is where I like to branch out into 2 separate problems, because I'm going to do 8 plus 32 over 6, and then I'm going to do the minus. I'm going to do 8 minus 32 over 6. Okay? That's what I can do in my head, right? 8 plus 32 is 40, and then you have 40 divided by 6. And then over here you have 8 minus 32. So we've got, that's going to be negative 24 over 6. So this will be negative 4. And this will be a decimal of some kind. Let me pull up my calculator here, because 40 divided by 6 is 6.66 repeating. And there we go. There's my 2 solutions. All right, so I'd come over here and say x equals 6.66 repeating, and the other one is x equals -4. And there's my two solutions. All right, guys, that's it for today. Sorry for the long video. I'm trying to get through these equations. We're going to do another round of equations tomorrow, so you'll see some of these again. And then we'll also talk about this one here. We'll talk about how to handle an equation that looks like that. All right, guys, have a great day. See you later.